Hello, this is Professor Marsh again. This is Business Ethics Unit 10 at Newberry College, Fall 2021. This is the second half of Chapter 7. If you remember, we had the cold opening about being smart about smartphones. We had the quotes, which I replaced with quotes I liked better. Just ignore some of the notes that are on slide number 3. It looks like those uh, came in from another chapter. And now the unit objectives for the second half of Chapter 7 are these 5. 1, enumerate the reasons why employers choose to monitor employees' behavior. Yeah, we're going to talk about monitoring employees' behavior by employers. We're going to discuss the ethics of monitoring as it applies to drug testing. We're going to discuss the ethics of monitoring as it applies to polygraphs, genetic testing, and other forms of surveillance. We're going to explain the interests of an employer in regulating an employee's activities outside of work. And we're going to discuss the implications of world events like recent immigration policy changes on business decisions about privacy. So last time we looked at the first 5 objectives of Chapter 7. Now we're going to do the second half. So let's learn to enumerate the reasons why employers choose to monitor employees' work. And the main reason is because there are real benefits, both to the business and to the employees. Monitoring employee health can avoid sickness and accident to employees and can permit managers to take actions to reduce stress or dangerous work conditions for which the business might be responsible if left unmonitored. Monitoring electronic technology can protect against inappropriate actions, such as racist or sexist communications, sexual harassment, or just goofing off. Employees are less likely to engage in inappropriate behavior if they know that they're being monitored. And monitoring electronic technology can protect against espionage and theft as well. If you work for a large company providing technology like phones, tablets, computers, etc., you are being monitored. 28% of employers report firing employees for goofing off, searching the internet at work, and 18% have fired employees for posts on social media that were racist, sexist, or otherwise inappropriate or embarrassing to the employer. The old morals clause in personal services contracts for athletes, movie stars, and other entertainers worked like this. A morals clause in a contract prohibits an artist from engaging in conduct and sometimes speech that will bring either the artist or the other party to the contract, generally a studio, production company, or network, into public disrepute, scandal, embarrassment, or generally cast a bad light on the company's reputation. Criminal conduct commonly falls under the definition of prohibited acts in morals clauses, but acts that fall short of breaking the law can violate the clause too. For example, some morals clauses prohibit conduct that is offensive or shocking or insults public morals and public decency. One really has to wonder what that means nowadays. When Paris Hilton is still a celebrity getting contracts to sponsor things and brand herself. Companies generally push for morals clauses in their contracts to protect their brand and reputation. Even if you're not a Hollywood star or a major league athlete, you can be disciplined and possibly fired for an inappropriate tweet or Instagram post. And if you've got pictures, photographs on Facebook of the drunken beach party, close your account at least 30 days before you apply for a job. That's a very important thing to check off your to-do list. Drug testing. Many employers test employees for drug and alcohol use and can and will discipline employees for a positive test. Testing may be legally or ethically required in highly dangerous employment. Airline pilots, nuclear power plant engineers, longshore workers, truck and bus drivers, girder walkers, that sort of thing. Legalization of marijuana has complicated drug testing consequences in some states, but not South Carolina. South Carolina is one of the few states which has had no adjustment in its laws for legalization or recreational uh, marijuana. Uh, Workers have some protections from discipline for testing positive for marijuana use in several states, but not South Carolina. And some countries like Uruguay and Canada they've completely legalized recreational use, but not on the job. So if you're a pothead, Uruguay, which would be probably difficult for me to find on a map, someplace in the middle of Central America, I think. I think that's the Pantanal, maybe on the south east coast. And Canada, I can find Canada. I'm not sure I'd want to live there; it's too cold. But they have legalized weed. So, since THC stays in the system for up to 30 days, it can be difficult to determine in the legalized jurisdictions when the use by the employee occurred, and many companies that operate in those jurisdictions have dropped their random testing or periodic testing for THC. Statistically, because there's no way to discipline for it, statistically, between alcohol use and drug dependency, alcohol problems are by far the most frequent to show up in poor job performance and bad workplace behavior. And prescription drugs, rather than weed or other recreational or illegal drugs, are in a solid second place. Your book lists some of the warning signs on page 253 to 254. This is important for managers to be aware of. Many companies now offer treatment programs for drug and alcohol dependent employees using counseling and care instead of automatic dismissal. An interesting question would be to compare the ethical aspects of these companies with those that label themselves as drug free workplaces. Which approach would lead to healthier long term consequences? I think that would be an interesting study. I don't know that I've seen that. I'm sure there have been studies, but I don't think that there's any consensus on that point. Also, note the limits on an employer's use of personal information about the employee in hiring, which involves both legal and ethical issues. How much information from personality testing can be used by the employer ethically in hiring? Information about drug and alcohol use, sexual information, attitudes and beliefs, political activity, that sort of thing. Now, candidates in filling out questionnaires, or perhaps even um, taking other types of tests, oftentimes try to gear their answers toward what they think the employer wants to hear. Obviously, they want to get the job, so you have to be careful in terms of the accuracy of the information that you're collecting, as well as its use. And polygraph tests are sometimes ethically challenging too. Polygraphs oftentimes are not admissible for certain purposes in court. There are certainly ways in which certain employees, CIA agents, other spies are taught to beat polygraph tests by controlling their biometric readings, and some people some people are just pathological and they don't react to the stress of a lie in the way that normal people do. So anyhow, but what information, such as health information, is protected by HIPAA and other laws? We'll go on to HIPAA in the next section. So as promised, when we get to the section on other forms of monitoring, HIPAA is our first topic. HIPAA is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. It came around in the 1990s and provides that employers cannot use PHI, protected health information, in making employment decisions. PHI are medical records and individually identifiable health information. That's the, I guess, the accountability part of it. The portability part is that if you get fired or resign from a job where you had health insurance, you're entitled to keep that health insurance for up to 18 months after you leave employment just by paying in the monthly cost. There's also GINA, G-I-N-A, the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act. That came along in 2008 and provided that it was illegal to discriminate against employees or applicants because of genetic information. And it restricts the use of genetic information and prohibits covered entities, certain types of businesses, from requesting, requiring, purchasing, or disclosing genetic information with certain exceptions. And the Hawthorne effect is noted in the book. Does monitoring help or hurt work performance and productivity? And what your book notes is that studies show that short-term performance typically benefits from monitoring, but that might be outweighed long-term by the stress and anxiety, other negative effects from being in the fishbowl that long. So note the exceptions to GINA, the genetic information prohibitions on page 257. Employers can disclose genetic information to the employee in question upon request, and to monitor compliance with workplace safety and health laws, among other exceptions. Note that there is other biometric information like fingerprints, eye scans, which are now being collected by employers as an outgrowth of security concerns and security systems, and whose use are starting to be protected by legislation, such as the Illinois law that's noted on page 258. Also note the discussion of the Hawthorne effect. That's in there too. It's more detail than I just gave in the summary. It's sort of like it really is sort of like you put somebody in a fishbowl, and the effect can be similar to the celebrities who seem to go a little crazy in public because they're constantly recognized and looked at and approached by strangers. You start to think, well, I'm constantly being watched, and did somebody just see me pick my nose or adjust my underwear? Did they photograph it? So anyhow, Alec Baldwin, before he started shooting people, used to be famous for acting out in public when the paparazzi or even fans would talk to him, or he'd see them approaching him and his family. Employee monitoring has to be carefully controlled. And I know in my work experience, I once represented a former police officer, a young woman, who had taken up competitive bodybuilding in order to build herself up, maybe to overcome the prejudice that women, and she was quite small, but after all, her bodybuilding was quite strong. But the old saw that women don't have the physical strength to make it as a cop. Well, she sure did. She started weightlifting and her physique changed, and a friend at the gym suggested she enter a women's bodybuilding contest, which she won. She was one of only a few female cops on the force, and the male cops, or some of them, were aware of her growing celebrity in the bodybuilding world, and some of them started to monitor her and use the security features and technology that one finds within a police station to spy on her very inappropriately and to harass her, circulating pictures of her, some of which were candid shots that were really much more candid than they should have been. So she quit the department, sued for sexual harassment, and won a $1 million damages award. And she needed my help with two matters. One was the tax effects of the settlement award, which is somewhat complicated. And two, making herself disappear in a new location because there's no witness protection program for a former cop who wins against a unionized police force. And the harassment didn't end even after she quit and sued. So we helped her set up entities and trusts which kept her name off of all of her investments in the award, and which kept her name off of all the entities that we set up for her. So she's living in the her own witness protection program these days, and hopefully set for life. Uh, let's look at regulation of off-work acts. These can be things like tobacco use, weight, marital and relationship status, sexual orientation, gender identity, um, and also the off-work use of technology. So note the discussion about the different approaches to tobacco use and cigarette smokers on page 261. Today, virtually all workplaces are smoke-free, although most large employers make some accommodation for employees who smoke, such as cigarette breaks, special lounges or areas where cigarettes or other tobacco products are permitted, that sort of thing. Some employers provide free or subsidized stop smoking programs for their workers. Interesting health benefit. I think it's very interesting that the ACA, Obamacare Affordable Care Act, expressly permits health insurers to charge smokers up to 50% more on their premiums. That seems appropriate, of course, given all the healthcare costs that chronic smokers incur that non smokers typically don't. What's fascinating is that 7 states or jurisdictions, very, very blue states, have stepped in to mandate that health insurers not charge that premium for smoking. Those are California, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, Rhode Island, Vermont, and our good old nation's capital, Washington, D.C. How liberal and high minded those states are, right? No. Look at the next slide. The states with the highest taxes on packs of cigarettes, led by our good old nation's capital at $4.50 a pack, Washington, D.C., and it's $4.35 a pack in New York City, are the ones that won't let the health insurers recover the extra costs for smokers from the smokers themselves. How ethical was that? They won't let the health insurers charge extra for smokers because they want to get that money for their tax revenue. Uh, if you can't read this table in the slides, I've got a link to it also in my notes, so you can see it at taxadmin.org, and the actual link is right there. More about that later. Privacy rights after the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act permits monitoring of electronic communications if it's relevant to an ongoing criminal investigation. So this is this is monitoring, perhaps by law enforcement or the federal government. FISA investigations permit tracking of individuals if they serve a significant purpose to combat terrorism, foreign spying, etc. And they can be abused by tech companies and employers. If you ever want to see a justification of abusing privacy rights in the Patriot Act, just go back and get a copy of one of the seasons of 24, the old show about the terrorism fighters with Kiefer Sutherland and Mary Lynn Razjub and that group of actors. They they violated the Patriot Act, every several times every hour in the 24 hours of each season. And they always did it for a good reason. It was always for a good reason. Well, note that in other jurisdictions like China, to pick a obvious example, they have they don't have the same privacy rights. They don't have the Fourth Amendment, the Constitution. No, China has a social credit system. You might think of it as social credit for thee, but not for me, if you're Xi Jinping. Protection of personal choice and behavior. You see some of those laws in Charlotte. Charlotte's just adopted a version of the New York City hairstyle law that prohibits discrimination based on choices about personal appearance and natural haircuts and that sort of thing. And note that employers or prospective employers may ask about your social media accounts and may review them and probably will. So let's dig down a little deeper here. The Patriot Act created a terrorism foreign spying exception to the traditional and constitutional Fourth Amendment privacy protections. And um, as soon as it came along, people predicted it might be abused for political purposes. Well, here comes the Trump Russia myth, spun by the Clinton campaign and the DNC, that we now know was made up. Is that exception constitutional? It's certainly ethically challenged, and certainly the abuse of it are examples of bad ethics. Are social media companies entitled to protection under the law if they apply their own social credit system to users' posts based on politics or belief? Should they be regulated as public utilities? Should they have exposure to civil actions as publishers? China's social credit system, and there's a box describing it, is just really right out of 1984. What social credit would you give Xi Jinping after the COVID-19 virus was permitted to go around the world while China was restricting travel within its own borders after the virus was released? What effect would China's recall of the ships carrying PPP to the West, their recall of those ships back home at the beginning of the pandemic in the West, have on China's social credit score in the world? Well, anyhow, are social credit systems ever ethical anyway? If we think about individual freedom and personal choice. My feeling is that the New York City and now Charlotte haircut and hairstyle law is well overdue. There's too much discrimination against people based on the way they look. We can't all look like Brad Pitt and Jennifer Aniston, or pick your celebrities. And there's way too much discrimination based on how you look, and which makes constantly recording these videos a challenge for me. The note that again that employers will review your social media accounts, and that you should assume and act as though they will. My recommendation for those of you going into business is to have only one social media account in your name, which would be a LinkedIn account with your resume and professional interests described, with as many positive reviews and recommendations of your work as people are willing to give you, and with one perfectly written example of your written work posted as an article or a writing sample. Now, that's not the case if you're going to go into your own, kind of gig, social media economy. If you're going to, set up, some business that operates through Instagram or Facebook, or perhaps if you're going to try to attract followers or drive traffic to your website through Twitter, then my advice would be different. But if you're just going to get a job at a company and you want to have some social media presence, I think LinkedIn is the one which is the most positive and most professional, and probably would be most likely to impress business people who would check social media. And if you have a Facebook account, I think this is not news to most of you, but most people will use a nickname or some other way to try to disguise themselves, as opposed to using their own name on Facebook. But even then, a little bit of detective work makes you easy to find, particularly if they can find your friends and then they see something that looks like your name. So anyhow, just be careful about that. Now, one final point about tobacco use and those cigarette taxes. And the Patriot Act. The Al Qaeda terrorists back before 9/11 that were in the United States financed their activities in part by buying cigarettes in the Carolinas, where taxes are only pennies per pack, and reselling them on the streets Washington, D.C. and New York City, where the taxes are about $4.50 a pack. They could undercut the official price up north and still make about $4 a pack. Now, there's 10 packs of cigarettes in a carton. And if you took 500 cartons from South Carolina to New York City, you could make a $20,000 profit just by undercutting the taxes. Now, that's highly illegal, but that's more than enough to finance a lot of terrorist organizations. It's also, I think, selling cigarettes is what Eric Garner was done when he was killed by the police up there. But in any event, that's not just a small business. That's big business, and smuggling cigarettes across the state line is illegal, and treated a little bit like a drug smuggler if you get caught. So anyhow, but that's it on chapter 7 now in business ethics. We were finished with 10, 10 units out of, we have 13 structured units, and then the last unit is going to be your final paper in the course. I am in the process of grading your first papers and also your quizzes for the first 3 units, and we'll be posting more papers and more quizzes very soon. So keep up with your reading. If you haven't watched all the videos, read all the PowerPoint presentations, please go back and do that. Sorry for the technical issues that kept me behind for the first half of the semester, but we are now caught up and heading strong toward the finish in the course. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to email me or call me. My contact information is in your materials. Have a great day, and we'll talk again soon.